About a week ago, I was in some cafe in a local town here, won't mention which one, Scotch Plains. Just having a cup of coffee, don't accuse me, just a cup of coffee. And some gentleman walks in, standing next to me. He's about 6'3", and he's built like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You all know Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I noticed that he seemed to be wearing something that looks like a mezuzah around his neck. It's not often that I bump into an Arnold Schwarzenegger lookalike who's wearing a mezuzah. And since I regard everyone I meet as a potential temple member recruit, I said, let me start up a conversation. So I said, excuse me, sir, do you mind if I ask you a question? I noticed you have a very interesting pendant around your neck, and I pointed to it. And I was imagining that he would tell me about his mezuzah, and I imagined then I would tell him that, I happen to be the local rabbi in Clark, and then we'd have a nice conversation, and one thing leads to another. What actually happened is, he looks at me and smiles. He takes the thing in his fingers, and he says, oh, this? Yeah. You see, it's got my name on it, and my wife gave it to me for Christmas. Apparently, it was some cylindrical pendant on which you're supposed to inscribe your name, rather than a representation of what we Jews affix to the doorpost. So I said to him, wow, that's really nice. And he said, thank you. And that was the end of the conversation. Now, I have a mind that always says, what if? What if? So over the last couple of days, I'm thinking, that was a pleasant little interaction I had with this fellow. But what if I said, excuse me, sir, that's a nice mezuzah you're wearing? And he might have said, what's a mezuzah? And I would have explained the Jewish connection. And then what if in fact I was facing a rabid anti-Semite, and I was wondering how he might conceivably respond and how that interaction, that conversation might have unfolded. Who knows? Just what if? Letting my imagination play with what if scenarios is just something I always do. But in the times that we're living in, it can actually be helpful to anticipate all kinds of scenarios. Now, let me be clear, we should not be walking around worrying excessively, what if? But sensible caution isn't a bad thing. We all know very well what just happened recently in our nation's capital, when a young couple, Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lashinsky, both engaged to be married, stood outside the Jewish Museum. And just the other day, we know about what happened to a group in Boulder, Colorado, a group that had gathered in peaceful support of the hostages in Gaza, and they were attacked by a crazy individual. We don't want to increase unnecessarily the level of our anxiety, but we should be aware. We should be aware that we're in a time when we just have to be a little bit more careful. But still, let's remember to put it all in perspective, because we are not the first generation to face challenges, and I am sure we will not be the last. And it's also true that today is not worse than it's been in the past. In fact, in many ways, it's a lot better for us on balance than it has been for generations. I was listening to a talk the other day on the subject of anti-Semitism at Harvard, and the speaker said that in his mind, he talks always to his great-great-great-grandfather. And he says to his great-great-great-grandfather, Zayda, it's so terrible here what's going on for the Jews at Harvard. And his Zayda responds, there are Jews at Harvard? Yes, there are. And we have to fight back against the anti-Semitism in the most reasonable and rational ways that we can. And one of the most important ways is that we have to continue to send our kids to the best schools and not, as I have heard some people suggest, stay away from them. But we also have to send them to these schools better prepared to be strong and knowledgeable, to be literate Jews who are proud of their heritage and ready to defend it. And when I say we, I mean the entire Jewish community. Because in many ways, we have not done a good enough job at that. In a moment, we're going to be reciting the Yizkor prayers. And we're going to remember our loved ones who came before us. And we know they too had their challenges. And we owe it to them, and we owe it to all the past generations going back to Sinai. We owe it to them to better educate our children and our grandchildren in the rich tradition that we have inherited. And we owe it to them to be better role models on how to be Jews who live with pride and strength and confidence. And this is a task of the entire Jewish community and all the resources that we have. We must, with those resources, undertake that task. A week ago, I was on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, not as a student, but just passing through, and I stopped off there. And I was thinking, looking around all the buildings, the quad where they had the encampments, and I said to myself, maybe, just maybe, we need a little fewer Jewish names on all those buildings and more investments in Jewish schools and summer camps. May the memories of our loved ones be a blessing. May we and our children always say with pride, Am Yisrael Chai V'Kayam, the Jewish people lives now and forever. Amen.